The sun was just rising over Foo Village when the peace shattered under the sound of fists pounding flesh. "Stop crying, brat! A pirate king can't whine over a bloody nose!" Garp's booming voice echoed through the clearing. 7-year-old Monkey D. Luffy was sprawled in the dirt, clutching his cheek, but his grin was as defiant as ever. "I'm not crying, old man! I'm just leaking!" he shouted, springing back to his feet. Garp snorted. "Good! Then let's see you dodge this one!" In the blink of an eye, Garp's massive fist was already descending. Luffy's eyes widened, and for the first time, his world slowed down. He could feel the intent, see the path of the blow before it happened. Instinct took over. He ducked, rolled, and countered with a punch coated in raw, shimmering black armament Haki. The impact shook the air. Garp staggered back a single step, his grin stretching into something dangerous. "Ha! There it is! Observation! Armament! Not bad, brat! Now again, faster!" Days bled into weeks, weeks into years. Luffy fought beasts twice his size blindfolded to sharpen his observation. He trained his armament by punching boulders until his fists cracked, then coating his bones in Haki to strike harder. His conqueror's Haki erupted in wild storms until Garp taught him to focus it like a blade, cutting through the wills of his enemies without touching his friends. By 12, Luffy could project Raya through steel, predict movements seconds ahead, and unleash bursts of conquerors so sharp it could topple giants. The training was hell, but it was home. When the time came for Luffy to set sail at 17, Garp stood on the dock, arms folded. "Remember, brat, I didn't train you to be the Pirate King. I trained you to survive everything this cursed sea throws at you. You want that title? Earn it." Luffy grinned, touching the brim of the straw hat Shanks had entrusted to him. "I'll be back with it, old man." And with that, the small boat drifted toward the horizon. It didn't take long for the world to notice. Luffy's first opponent, Alvida, didn't even get to swing her club before a single armament punch sent her flying into the sea, unconscious. The Marines at Shellstown watched in disbelief as he shattered Captain Morgan's axe arm with a flicker of black Haki and cut Zoro free without taking a single hit. Zoro eyed him warily. "You're not normal, are you?" Luffy only laughed. "Nah, I'm me." Every island became a stage for power the East Blue had never seen. Buggy's body parts were pinned midair with pinpoint observation, his real torso smashed into the dirt. Don Krieg's iron armor shattered like glass under Raya. Arlong's entire crew collapsed before the fight began, victims of a wave of conquerors so focused it felt like the air was crushing them. By the time the Going Merry set sail for the Grand Line, the bounty posters printed by the Marines showed a grinning face worth 150 million berries. The title below read, "The Haki Monster." The Grand Line did not go quietly. Crocodile's sand powers crumbled under the weight of armament strikes, forcing him into the ground with such force that the palace walls shook. Enel's lightning crashed harmlessly against the Haki-coated body, the god, falling from the sky unconscious before his plan could ignite. And yet, it was Sabaody Archipelago where the real shift began. Kizaru arrived, light bending around him as he descended on the straw hats. "You kids are making too much noise." Future sight kicked in, the flash of a light kick, the faint hum of a blade, and Luffy was already moving. His fist, wrapped in advanced armament and laced with conquerors, met the Admiral's leg in midair. The explosion of force sent ripples through the grove, and for the first time in years, Kizaru slid back a step. Kuma appeared, but instead of scattering the crew, he froze. His head tilted slightly, and he whispered, "Survive the New World," before vanishing. News of the encounter reached Marineford before Luffy did, and when Ace's execution was announced, the admirals prepared for war. What they didn't prepare for was Luffy walking through the gates of Marineford like a storm made flesh. Mihawk's sword strikes were dodged before they began. Admirals found themselves parried, deflected, overwhelmed. Ace was freed in minutes, but when Akainu struck, Luffy's rage erupted, not wild, but honed. Conqueror's Haki crashed over the battlefield, freezing soldiers mid-charge. A single Ryu-powered punch cracked Akainu's jaw and sent him skidding across the plaza. Ace still fell that day, but the world saw something else, a pirate who could face the strongest alive and walk away standing. From there, the seas changed. Yonko took notice. Kaido called him brat, but tested him, only to be driven into the ground in Wano by advanced conquerors that split the clouds. Big Mom tasted defeat, her Prometheus and Zeus sliced apart midair. Even Blackbeard, bold and arrogant, hesitated before making his move. When Luffy finally reached Laugh Tale, it wasn't just with his crew, it was with a fleet of allies, Marines who respected him, and islands that flew his flag out of loyalty, not fear. The world government's final stand came under the shadow of Marineford, with Amu revealed and the Gorosei wielding ancient powers. But all the strength in the world couldn't change the fact that every move they made was red, every strike broken, every will crushed beneath the king's Haki. When the dust cleared, the seas were free. The title of Pirate King was his, but more than that, so was the promise he'd made as a boy, to live free, and let others do the same. On the day of his coronation atop the Sunny's deck, Garp appeared, grinning through tears. "Ha, you did it, brat! You really did it!" Luffy only smiled, holding the hat high against the wind. "Told you I'd be back." The wind howled through the training cliffs outside Foo Village, carrying with it the thuds of fists against stone and the barking roar of a man whose voice could shake the seas. Monkey D. Garp, hero of the Marines, stood with arms like ship masts crossed over his chest, his shadow looming over a scrawny, wild-eyed 7-year-old boy. "Again!" Garp barked. Luffy wiped the blood from his nose, grinning up at his grandfather with teeth too big for his small face. "You're gonna have to hit harder if you want me to stay down, old man." Garp's grin was sharper than a cutlass. "Oh? Is that so?" He vanished. One moment he was there, the next the air screamed as his fist cut through it, descending toward Luffy's head with the weight of a falling boulder. Luffy's pupils shrank, and then the world slowed. The smell of the sea. The shifting of Garp's stance. The tiniest tightening of his shoulder. He could feel where the strike was going before it landed. His body moved before he thought, ducking low and rolling to the side, his small fists clenching and turning black with raw armament Haki. He countered, striking Garp's shin. The impact echoed like a gunshot, kicking up dust and sending a ripple of shock through the stone beneath them. Garp didn't even flinch, but he smiled. "Observation. Armament. Good. But you're still too slow." The training was relentless. Mornings began with Luffy blindfolded, forced to fight wild beasts using only his observation Haki to sense their movements. Afternoons were spent punching ironwood posts until his knuckles split, then coating the bones with armament until they felt like steel. Evenings were the worst. Garp would release his conqueror's Haki in waves, forcing Luffy to stay conscious through sheer will, then teaching him to push back, to narrow his own Haki into a sharp, precise force instead of a wild storm. He learned to project Raya through walls, to feel the heartbeat of an enemy through the ground, to look a second into the future and change it. By 12, he could topple a bear twice his size with a single blow, shatter boulders without touching them, and knock out small groups of bandits with nothing but a glare. But the training wasn't just strength. Garp drilled into him one truth: power without control is a weapon pointed at yourself. "Don't just win, brat," Garp said one night, staring into the campfire. "Win on your terms. Beat 'em so hard they never think about coming back." When 17 came, Garp stood on the dock, the waves slapping the wood. Luffy's small boat was tied and ready. His straw hat, the one Shanks had left him, hung low over his eyes. You remember what I told you? Garp asked. Luffy grinned. Yeah. Survive everything. Good. Garp smirked. Now get out of here before I decide to throw you into the Marines by force. The sail caught the wind, and Luffy's journey began. The first pirate he met, Alvida, was a joke. She swung her iron club with all the subtlety of a cannon blast, but Luffy's observation saw it coming seconds before it moved. One step forward, a flick of armament, and his fist connected with her gut. The impact blew the air out of her lungs and sent her flying off the deck into the waves. Zoro was next. Bound to a post in Shell's town, he squinted against the sun as a boy in a straw hat approached. You here to free me? Zoro asked. Luffy tilted his head. Only if you promise to join my crew. Zoro's brow furrowed. You're insane. Probably, Luffy said, and then turned as Marines opened fire. Bullets flattened against his skin, the lead crumpling against armament-coated flesh. A single wave of conquerors sent half the firing squad collapsing where they stood. By the time Morgan realized what happened, his axe arm was already in pieces, shattered by a precise Raya strike. Fine, Zoro muttered, once the ropes fell away. I'll join. But I still think you're insane. The east blue bent under Luffy's presence. Buggy's floating limbs were yanked midair by armament-coated grabs, his true torso smashed into the dirt. Don Krieg's iron plates cracked under a single punch. Arlong's shark crew collapsed before touching him, smothered by a wave of conquerors that felt like drowning. By the time the Going Merry set course for the Grand Line, Luffy's bounty wasn't 30 million. It was 150 million. The poster read, Monkey D. Luffy, the Haki monster. The wind howled as the Going Merry slid into reverse mountain's roaring waters, but even the looming walls of the Grand Line couldn't shake Luffy's grin. His senses were alive. Observation Haki reading the currents, the shifting weight of the ship, even the erratic heartbeat of the giant whale blocking their path. Whoa! It's huge! Usopp yelped. Don't attack, Luffy said sharply. He's not trying to hurt us. His words were calm, certain, and sure enough, the whale blinked slowly, its massive eye studying them with a sorrow only Luffy could feel. The rest of the crew gawked as Luffy stepped forward, placing a hand against the whale's hide. His armament spread not as a weapon, but as a steady pressure, a reassurance. We'll visit again, he promised. By the time they reached Whiskey Peak, Baroque Works agents barely had time to unsheathe their weapons before Luffy's conquerors Haki rolled through the streets like an invisible tide. One by one, they dropped unconscious, leaving Vivi staring wide-eyed. You're not like any pirate I've ever seen. Luffy grinned. I'm me. Little Garden was a playground. Giants Dory and Broggy roared with laughter when Luffy not only dodged a T-Rex bite but knocked it out cold with a single Raya strike. Mr. Three's wax was shattered in moments, and by the time they left, both giants swore an oath to answer Luffy's call. Drum Island was over before it began. Wapple tried to bite him. Luffy's hockey-coated fist sent the king skipping across the snow like a stone over water. Chopper didn't just join. He saw in Luffy a kind of freedom that made him believe in himself again. Alabasta, though, that was different. Crocodile sat on his throne, arrogance dripping like venom. Straw Hat, you've made quite a name for yourself. But against a Logia, your fists mean nothing. Luffy's smile sharpened. Wanna bet? The fight was short, brutally short. Observation let Luffy track Crocodile's every move. Armament shattered his sand form with each hit. When Crocodile tried to retreat underground, Luffy's Raya punched straight into the palace floor, sending shockwaves that burst him out into the open. The final blow cracked the sky above Alyabarna. News spread faster than the sandstorm faded. Crocodile defeated in 3 minutes. Luffy the Haki monster topples a warlord. His bounty leapt to 400 million. Skypiea was worse for its god. Enel's smug smile faltered the moment his lightning crashed harmlessly against Luffy's armament-coated skin. Future Sight let Luffy dance through bolts as if they moved in slow motion. One punch, just one, sent Enel sprawling unconscious, the ringing of the golden bell echoing across the sky island. Water 7 and Eni's lobby became a declaration. CP9's assassins moved like ghosts, but Luffy's observation tracked them all. Lucci's Tekai shattered under a burst of advanced conquerors that rippled across the battlefield, sending weaker agents crumpling. Luffy didn't just defeat him, he broke the gates of justice open with a projected riot strike, freeing Robin without hesitation. His new bounty, 600 million berries. And then came Sabaody. The Straw Hats walked through the groves with their usual mix of awe and bickering, but Luffy was tense. His observation painted the air with hostility. The Marines were here, in numbers. When the celestial dragon raised his gun toward Kami, the air itself seemed to shudder. Luffy's glare alone, pure, unrestrained conquerors, dropped the man unconscious before his finger touched the trigger. The onlookers didn't even have time to scream before the pacifistas moved in. Luffy didn't hold back. A single blow to the first pacifista's core crushed it like tin. The second's laser was deflected mid-flight with armament-coated hands. Then the light changed. Kizaru landed in the clearing, hands in pockets. Now, what do we have here? Future Sight flared. Luffy saw the kick before it began, saw every place it could land, every move it could make. His fist met the Admiral's light mid-strike, armament cracking the air in a sonic boom. The force shook the grove. Kizaru's smirk faltered. Before the clash could escalate, Kuma appeared. He didn't scatter them, he paused, staring into Luffy's eyes. "Survive the New World," he said simply, and vanished in a burst of air. The Straw Hats sailed up with every eye in the New World now turned toward them. The sea was a wall of chaos when Luffy arrived at Marineford. The air reeked of gunpowder and blood, the sound of cannon fire rolling over the ice-choked harbor. The execution platform loomed high above, ace chained between two blades. Luffy landed on the ice with a burst of speed that sent chunks flying. Marines turned, some fired rifles, others charged. But a pulse of Conqueror's Haki rolled out in all directions, flattening dozens instantly. "Luffy!" Whitebeard's booming voice cut through the din. The old man grinned like he just spotted a ghost. "You made it, brat." "Of course I did," Luffy said, already moving. Admiral Aokiji stepped forward, eyes spreading from his fingertips. "You won't make it to the platform." Future Sight flared. Luffy darted past an ice spear before it formed, closing the distance in a heartbeat. His armament-coated fist struck Aokiji in the gut, not enough to shatter him, but enough to send the Admiral sliding back, shock flashing in his eyes. Marine captains swarmed. Luffy didn't break stride, ducking, weaving, reading every attack before it happened. Bullets crumpled against Haki-coated skin, swords shattered on contact. Then Mihawk stepped into his path. "I cannot allow you to reach Ace," the swordsman said calmly, blade rising. "Then you'll have to stop me," Luffy replied, eyes locked on Mihawk's movements. The first swing came like lightning, but Luffy saw it before Mihawk moved. He twisted, the black blade barely grazing his shirt, and countered with a Ryu-infused punch. Mihawk blocked, the impact splitting the ice beneath their feet. "You're faster than the rumors," Mihawk said, pushing him back. "And you're not stopping me," Luffy shot back, vaulting past him in a single burst of speed. Kizaru appeared in a flash, a kick already mid-swing. Luffy's Future Sight painted it clear. He raised an armament-coated forearm, absorbing the blow, then lashed out with his other hand, slamming Kizaru into the frozen ground hard enough to crack it. The executioners raised their blades over Ace's neck. Luffy's heart thundered. Observation stretched. The path to Ace was clear, but Akainu was moving to block it. When Akainu's magma fist came down, Luffy met it head-on. Riot burned inside his knuckles, armament hardened to a pitch-black shine, conquerors bursting with raw killing intent. The impact shook Marineford, the shockwave ripping through the plaza. Akainu's eyes widened as the force pushed him back, not stopped, but driven away from Ace. In that heartbeat, Luffy shattered the execution platform's supports, grabbing Ace in a single leap. The crowd roared, pirates cheering, marines shouting orders, but Luffy barely heard it. "Let's go, Ace!" They fought their way toward the ships, but fate still struck. Akainu reappeared, and in a moment too fast to stop, Ace turned, magma bursting against his back. But this time, Ace didn't fall instantly. Luffy's Haki flared the moment before the blow landed, a shield of armament wrapping Ace's body. The attack still hit, still burned, but Ace lived. Luffy roared, his conquerors exploding in a wave so fierce that even Vice Admirals staggered. His next punch caught Akainu under the jaw, sending the magma man hurtling into the rubble of the plaza. "Retreat!" Sengoku's voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone fall back! Whitebeard is..." But Whitebeard wasn't fallen yet. Luffy and Ace fought at his side until the Moby Dick sailed away under heavy cover. The war ended not with Ace's death, but with the world seeing something they couldn't unsee, a pirate who had stood against 3 admirals, the world's greatest swordsman, and the might of the Marines, and left standing. The moon hung low over the Grand Line, casting silver ripples across the restless sea. The ship creaked under the strain of the waves, but inside the captain's quarters, the silence was far heavier than the wind outside. Luffy sat on the edge of the bed, his straw hat dangling from his fingers, his eyes locked on Rouge. She was lying back against the pillows, her breath slow but deliberate, one hand resting protectively over the small swell of her belly. They were both thinking the same thing, though either wanted to say it aloud. Time was running out. The rumors had already reached them, whispers that the world government had taken a special interest in her pregnancy. The fact that she was GOLD, Roger's lover, had been dangerous enough, but now, with Luffy's strange and unexplainable presence at her side, the mystery had doubled. Too many people were asking questions. Too many ships had been spotted shadowing their course. Luffy tightened his grip on the brim of his hat. "They're coming for us." Rouge turned her head slightly, her auburn hair spilling over the pillow like fire in the lamplight. "I know," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tension. "But we've outrun them before." "This isn't the same," he replied, his voice unusually low. "It's not just Marines this time. I can feel it." His gaze drifted toward the porthole, to the distant horizon swallowed by night. "Someone's pulling the strings. Someone who knows things they shouldn't." Rouge's lips curved into a faint smile. "You sound like Roger when you talk like that. Always thinking there's some shadow behind the curtain." Luffy shook his head. "It's not paranoia. It's different. There's this feeling I get sometimes. Like something's watching from way up high." He clenched his fist. "And I've seen what happens when that kind of thing sets its sights on someone." She watched him for a moment, her mind catching on the weight in his tone. She'd asked before about his past, but he'd always dodged, claiming it was complicated, or not important right now. But there were cracks in his armor tonight. Cracks she wanted to understand. Before she could speak, the door burst open. A tall man with a weathered face stepped in, his eyes sharp as steel. "We've got trouble, Captain," he said, his voice gruff but controlled. It was Silver, their first mate. "Scout ship spotted on the starboard horizon. No flag, but she's cutting through the waves like she knows exactly where we are. Rouge sat up. Could just be a merchant. No, Luffy interrupted, already on his feet. They're not here to trade. Silver glanced between them. Orders? Keep course for the rendezvous point, Luffy said. And don't let them see us panic. By dawn, the shadow of the pursuing vessel had grown larger. Its sleek black hull and gilded trim marked it not as a marine ship, but something worse, a celestial dragon's private craft. The kind that traveled with enough firepower to level an island for sport. Rouge gripped the railing as the ship drew closer, her mind racing. If that's who I think it is, we can't outrun them. Luffy's jaw tightened. We won't need to. He turned to her, his voice calm but commanding. When I say run, you get below deck and stay there. Luffy. No arguing. I can handle them. But before either could say more, a ripple of unease spread through the crew. On the approaching ship's deck stood a tall figure draped in opulent white and gold, their face hidden behind a mask shaped like a sun. At their side, a marine officer in his prime, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that commanded entire fleets, stood with arms crossed. Rouge's breath caught. Sengoku. Luffy's eyes narrowed. So they brought a future fleet admiral. Great. The masked celestial dragon lifted a hand, and a voice, amplified by a den mushi, echoed across the waves. Portgas d. Rouge. You will surrender yourself immediately. Failure to comply will result in the annihilation of your vessel and all aboard. Rouge's fingers curled around the wood of the railing until her knuckles whitened. I won't let them take me, she whispered, more to herself than anyone. They're not going to, Luffy said, stepping forward. Not while I'm here. The battle began before the sun cleared the horizon. Cannon fire roared, the air thick with smoke and the sharp tang of salt and gunpowder. Luffy moved like lightning, his fists shattering iron and splintering masts, his haki cutting through enemy ranks like a blade. The crew fought valiantly, but the enemy's reinforcements seemed endless. Rouge stayed below deck as he told her, but every shudder of the ship made her heart race. She could feel the baby kicking, a reminder that she was no longer just fighting for herself. Then, over the chaos, she heard a voice, a young voice, cocky and confident, carried by the wind. Need a hand, old man? Luffy froze mid-strike, his eyes widening as a smaller ship pulled alongside theirs. Standing on its bow was a red-haired boy, barely in his teens, a grin on his face and a sword at his hip. Shanks. A memory, no, a paradox, flashed through Luffy's mind. Shanks, years older, handing him the straw hat. When you're a great pirate, return this to me. But here, Shanks was just a boy. And he had no idea who Luffy really was. Guess I'm crashing the party, Shanks shouted, leaping onto the deck with reckless energy. The tide of the fight began to shift. Between Luffy's sheer force, Shanks' sharp instincts, and the crew's determination, the enemy lines faltered. Sengoku himself stepped in, his blows heavy and precise, but even he couldn't ignore the strange energy radiating from Luffy. When the masked celestial dragon realized they were losing, they signaled for retreat, their voice hissing through the den mushi. This is not over, Portgas. The child you carry belongs to the world. Rouge's heart pounded. She didn't even know what that meant, but she knew it wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. That night, anchored in a quiet cove far from pursuit, Rouge found Luffy leaning against the railing, staring at the moon. They won't stop, she said softly. No, he admitted. But neither will I. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his. I don't know what fate has planned for us, Luffy. But I do know one thing. I won't let them decide my life. Or our child's. He turned to her then, his eyes burning with something fierce and unshakable. Good. Because I've seen the future where they win. And I'm not letting it happen again. Her breath caught at his words. Again? He smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. I'll tell you. Soon. But for now. He placed a hand gently over her stomach. We change everything. And as the waves lapped against the hull, Luffy knew that the war for Rouge's freedom, and their child's future, had only just begun. The sun burned high over the shimmering waves, casting a path of gold toward the distant horizon. Somewhere beyond that endless line of sea and sky, freedom waited, freedom that could only be claimed by the strongest, the boldest, and the most reckless of men. Monkey D. Luffy's hands rested on the brim of his straw hat, the faintest of grins tugging at his lips as the salty wind whipped his face. But unlike the carefree boy the world knew in another history, this Luffy carried something deeper, an inheritance not from a mountain bandit's adopted son or a random pirate, but from the king of the pirates himself. Gold. Roger's blood ran in his veins, and though he didn't yet understand the weight of that name, the world would make sure he did. It hadn't always been this way. The story began long before Luffy's smile first touched the seas, before his little fishing boat was even built. It began on a storm-drenched night in the East Blue, when a young boy was left on the doorstep of Foo Village's mayor, wrapped in a weather-worn coat that smelled faintly of salt and gunpowder. In his tiny hand was clutched a folded scrap of parchment, signed with only 4 words, "Protect him." For Roger. Mayor Whoop Slap had never told anyone the full truth of that night. The old man knew what it meant to carry such a secret. He knew the world's hatred for the Pirate King. So, the boy was raised quietly, under the care of the mountain bandit Dayton and her crew, never knowing the truth of his father. But blood has a way of making itself known. Even as a child, Luffy had a stubborn fire that burned brighter than any other. Where other kids would cry when hurt, Luffy would laugh, as if daring pain to try again. He picked fights with kids twice his size, climbed trees just to throw himself from the top, and declared to anyone who would listen that he would be the greatest pirate the world had ever seen. That was before the day he met Shanks. The red-haired pirate's arrival in Foo Village had been like the opening of a new chapter in Luffy's life. He didn't just admire Shanks. He saw in him the embodiment of that free, untamed spirit his heart longed for. The day Luffy ate the Gomu Gomu no Mi was the day fate began weaving its threads tighter, pulling him toward the storm that his father once commanded. But there was something different in how Shanks treated him. When the red-haired captain learned Luffy's full name, Gold. Luffy, his smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there. Shanks knew. He didn't say it aloud, not even to his crew, but he understood exactly who the boy was, and what that meant. Roger had been his captain, his friend, his hero. This boy was his legacy. Shanks never told Luffy the truth either. Instead, he watched over him from afar, occasionally offering advice that carried strange weight. "There's more to being a pirate than strength," he told Luffy one quiet night, after the bar had emptied. "A man's worth is measured by the lives he changes, not just the enemies he defeats." Luffy didn't fully understand, but he nodded. Years passed. When Shanks left Foo Village for the last time, leaving behind his treasured straw hat with the promise that Luffy would return it once he became a great pirate, the boy's path was set in stone. But the world was not blind. The Marines had long memories, and certain records were never destroyed. Hidden in the depths of Marineford's archives was an old birth record, sealed with the world government's highest level of secrecy. Only a handful of people knew it existed: Monkey D., Garp, Fleet Admiral Sengoku, and a few shadowy figures in the cipher pole agencies. That knowledge was dangerous. Dangerous to Luffy, dangerous to anyone who harbored him, and dangerous to the balance of power in the world. By the time Luffy set sail from Foo Village at 17, word had already reached ears it was never meant to. The Going Merry rocked gently in the wind as Luffy stood at the bow, grinning at the open ocean. Zoro was sharpening his swords on the deck, Nami was charting a course, and Usopp was loudly boasting about his imaginary fleet. To anyone looking, they were just another rookie crew chasing the Grand Line's promise. But in Marineford, Vice Admiral Tsuru read over a report with a frown. "He's on the move," she said to Sengoku. Sengoku adjusted his glasses, his face grave. "Keep this quiet. If the truth comes out too soon, every pirate on the sea will come for him, some to protect him, others to claim his head. And if the world learns the Pirate King's son is alive, the balance will shatter. But the truth has a way of slipping free." Far across the seas, in a candlelit room deep within Emergence, the 5 elders discussed the same boy. "He's inexperienced," one said coldly. "He can be removed before he becomes a threat." Another shook his head. "No. He is Roger's son. Blood like that cannot be erased so easily. If we move too soon, it will spark another age of piracy like the one we fought to end." "So we watch," a third concluded. "For now." But they underestimated him. Because Luffy was not just chasing the One Piece, he was following an unshakable instinct that seemed burned into his very soul. When he declared to Alvida, to Buggy, to Arlong, and to Crocodile that he would be king of the pirates, he wasn't just speaking a dream. He was speaking his inheritance. The turning point came in Alabasta. When the dust settled after Crocodile's defeat, the Straw Hats were celebrated as heroes by those who knew the truth and condemned as criminals by those who followed the Marine's lies. It was then that an intercepted cipher pole transmission reached a shadowed figure in the New World, Silver's Rayleigh. Roger's right hand leaned back in his chair, reading the name in silence. Then, for the first time in decades, he laughed, not the bitter laugh of an old man, but the deep, hearty laugh of a man who saw hope for the first time since his captain's execution. "Luffy, you really are his son!" Rayleigh knew what this meant. The seas would not remain calm for long. And he was right. By the time Luffy reached Enies lobby, declaring war on the world government to save Nico Robin, the whispers were no longer whispers. In dark taverns across the Grand Line, in the underbelly of pirate ports, in the war rooms of Marine headquarters, one truth began to spread like wildfire. The Pirate King's bloodline lives. And with every battle Luffy fought, every ally he gained, every impossible victory he pulled from the jaws of defeat, that truth grew harder to ignore. The world didn't just see a rookie pirate anymore. They saw the ghost of Gold, Roger, reborn in rubber and fire. The night was quiet, save for the rhythmic crash of waves against the secluded shore. Moonlight spilled across the small island like silver paint, touching the sand, the trees, and the 2 figures standing close by the water's edge. Rouge's eyes searched Luffy's face, her heartbeat still racing from the events earlier that day. They had barely escaped Marine surveillance. Young Garp's sharp instincts had been inches away from discovering them. And yet, here they were, stealing a moment of peace as though the world wasn't tightening its net around them. Luffy stood with his straw hat tilted low, looking out over the ocean with that same unshakable grin. But Rouge could see it. Beneath the carefree smile, there was a spark of something deeper. He wasn't just laughing off the danger. He was thinking. Planning. "Luffy," she began softly, her voice blending with the sea breeze. "Are you sure you want to stay here with me? You've been risking everything since the day we met." He turned to her, the moon catching in his dark eyes. "I told you before, Rouge, I'm not going anywhere. I already made up my mind." Rouge's lips curved into a small smile, but there was worry behind it. You say that so easily, but you don't understand what it means to be hunted by the world government. They will never stop. Luffy chuckled, his grin widening. Then they'll just have to catch me. And they won't. His confidence was infuriating, yet somehow comforting. Rouge felt her chest tighten. It had only been weeks since she met him, but already, she couldn't imagine the days without his warmth, without his ridiculous optimism that seemed to make the impossible feel possible. Still, the reality was unrelenting. She was carrying a child. Her child. His child. And every passing day made her more of a target. Luffy, she said again, her hand unconsciously brushing against her stomach. If they find out about the baby. He stepped closer, placing his palm gently over hers. That's why I'm here. I won't let anyone hurt you. Or him. Or her. Her breath caught. The sincerity in his voice struck her deeper than any vow could. For a moment, they simply stood there, the waves washing at their feet. Then Luffy looked up at the sky, his eyes tracing the constellations. You know, where I come from, there's a promise I made to my friends. But now I've got a new one. Rouge tilted her head. A new promise? He looked back at her, his smile softening. Yeah. No matter what happens, I'll be there when our kid is born. And after that, I'll make sure the world they grow up in is free. That's my promise to you. Rouge's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him how impossible that sounded, how foolish it was to believe in such things, but she couldn't. Not when the fire in his voice made her want to believe it too. She stepped into his arms, resting her head against his chest. Then I'll hold you to it, Captain. The word made him laugh, low and warm. Guess that makes you part of my crew. The moment lingered, warm and fragile. But somewhere in the shadows of the island, a figure watched. The quiet scrape of boots against rock was almost lost to the sound of the tide. A transponder snail blinked, relaying every word to an unknown listener. The world was shifting, and their time was running out. The sea breeze swept across the deck of the small, inconspicuous vessel cutting its way through the sparkling blue waters of the East Blue. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting a golden glow over everything, but the two figures standing at the bow were lost in a world entirely their own. Luffy leaned against the railing, his straw hat tilted back just enough to let the wind brush through his hair. Beside him, Rouge was silent, her eyes fixed on the endless horizon. Her fingers rested lightly on the wood, but Luffy noticed how they twitched, as if she was holding back thoughts she didn't want to voice. You're thinking about them again, he said softly. Rouge glanced at him, the faintest curve of a smile gracing her lips. About who? Those people in Lobe Town who stared at you like they'd seen a ghost. About the Marines watching every step you took. His tone wasn't accusing, it was concerned. Rouge sighed, turning her gaze back to the waves. You're not wrong. Every island we visit, I can feel eyes on me. Like they know what I am, even though I haven't done anything. You're Rouge, Luffy said simply, straightening. You're free. Nobody decides your life except you. Her lips parted, a mix of surprise and something warmer flickering in her eyes. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. Luffy grinned. If they try to hurt you, we just beat them up. That earned him a laugh, soft, almost musical, but tinged with sadness. You really think you can take on the whole world for me? Luffy didn't hesitate. I don't think. I know. Before Rouge could answer, the faint thump of footsteps approached from behind. The ship's lookout, a weathered man they'd hired for the voyage, appeared with a nervous expression. Captain, we've got a problem. There's a marine ship trailing us. Fast one too. Flag shows Vice Admiral's insignia. Rouge stiffened instantly. Vice Admiral? That means. They're not here for me, Luffy said, voice calm but eyes narrowing. They're here for us. Rouge's gaze darted to the horizon. Sure enough, a white-sailed warship was closing in, the seagull emblem of the Marines fluttering proudly. The sunlight glinted off the polished cannon muzzles lined along its side. Luffy, we can't fight them here. They'll sink this ship in minutes. Then we don't give them the chance. Luffy turned to the helmsman. Turn starboard, full speed. We'll lose them in the coral maze. The helmsman hesitated. That's dangerous. Trust me, Luffy said. His voice left no room for argument. As the ship veered sharply, Rouge found herself gripping the railing, hard hammering. The coral maze was a labyrinth of jagged reefs and swirling currents. One wrong move, and they'd be smashed to splinters. The Marines didn't falter. Their warship followed, cutting the distance fast. From the deck, a booming voice carried over the waves. Porgas D. Rouge! By order of the world government, you are under arrest. Surrender now, and you may yet be spared. Rouge's blood ran cold. Her name, shouted so openly, felt like a brand. Luffy's jaw tightened. Ignore them. They're not taking you anywhere. The warship's cannons roared. The first volley slammed into the sea just short of the ship, geysers of seawater exploding into the air. The second volley came closer, one cannonball smashing into the stern and sending shards of wood flying. Luffy! Rouge started, but her words were drowned by the sound of his voice as he called out his attack. Goma Goma no! Balloon! His body inflated in an instant, catching several cannonballs mid-flight and bouncing them back toward the Marines. One struck the warship's mast, snapping it in half with a crack like thunder. Rouge's breath caught. She'd seen him fight before, but the sheer defiance in his stance now, it made her chest tighten in a way she didn't fully understand. Hold on! Luffy yelled as the helmsman twisted the wheel hard, weaving the ship between the jagged spires of coral rising from the sea like ancient sentinels. The warship tried to follow, but the reefs closed in too tightly. A sickening screech of tearing wood echoed as the Marine's hull scraped against stone. They were stuck. By the time the warship freed itself, Luffy and Rouge's ship had vanished into the maze's twisting channels. The crew let out relieved shouts, but Rouge remained silent, staring at Luffy. You just made an enemy out of a vice admiral, she said. Do you know what that means? Yeah, Luffy replied with a small smile. It means they'll come after us again. And again. But that's fine. He stepped closer, his voice softening. I told you, Rouge. I'll fight the whole world if I have to. Something in her resolve cracked then, not from fear, but from the overwhelming certainty that he meant it. She reached up, fingers brushing the edge of his straw hat. You're a fool, Luffy. Maybe, he admitted. But I'm your fool. The wind carried their laughter across the sea, even as the shadow of the world government loomed ever closer. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, spilling warm light across the deck of the modest but sturdy ship that now carried Luffy and Rouge. The wind was calm, and the sea was the deep, endless blue that could make anyone feel free, yet both of them knew freedom was fragile. Rouge leaned against the railing, her eyes closed as she breathed in the ocean air. She looked peaceful, but Luffy could see the tension in her shoulders. He walked up beside her, his straw hat tilted low, and leaned his arms on the railing next to hers. You're thinking about them again, he said softly. Rouge opened her eyes and smiled faintly. It's hard not to. The Marines, the celestial dragons, they won't forget what I've done. Running away with you only made me more of a target. Luffy's voice was calm but carried his usual certainty. Good. Let them come. I'll beat them all up. Rouge chuckled quietly, shaking her head. You make it sound so simple. It is. Luffy grinned, turning to face her. You're important to me, Rouge. I don't care if it's the Marines, the world government, or some ancient monster, they're not taking you away. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the weight she carried seemed lighter. You're reckless, but that's what I like about you. Before either could say more, the sky darkened, not from clouds, but from a looming shadow. A marine warship was approaching fast from the east, its sails taut with the wind, the navy insignia stark against the horizon. Rouge's heart tightened. They found us. Luffy's grin only widened. Good. I was getting bored. The warship drew closer, and through the spyglass Rouge had borrowed from the ship's cabin, she spotted a familiar figure at the bow, a young vice admiral, his uniform crisp and his expression sharp. Is that Garp? She whispered in disbelief. Luffy froze. Wait, my grandpa? Rouge looked between the ship and Luffy, confusion growing. Your what? I'll explain later, Luffy said, suddenly serious. But he can't see me yet. The warship came to a halt within cannon range, and a booming voice called out across the sea. Port Gasti, Rouge! By the authority of the world government, you are under arrest. Surrender peacefully, and no harm will come to you. Rouge's eyes narrowed. That's what they always say. Luffy stepped forward, planting his feet firmly on the deck. Then we won't give them the chance. In an instant, the cannons roared, but Luffy leapt into action. His arms stretched far across the water, gripping the warship's mast. Goma Goma no! He launched himself forward like a rocket, slamming into the deck and sending Marines flying. Rouge watched in awe as Luffy moved, fast, precise, and utterly unyielding. This wasn't the boyish pirate she had imagined when they first met. This was a man who had fought gods and emperors. But then Garp stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. You've got guts, kid, but you picked the wrong fight. Luffy met his grandfather's gaze, a mixture of determination and hidden emotion in his eyes. Sorry, Gramps. But I'm not letting you take her. The clash that followed shook the deck, Garp's raw power meeting Luffy's strength head-on. Wood splintered, waves crashed against the hull, and the Marines could only watch as the two forces battled like titans. Rouge, realizing the fight could draw more attention, began steering their own ship closer to the warship. With quick thinking, she used the chaos to slip aboard and untie one of the smaller marine boats. Luffy! She called out. Let's go! Luffy exchanged one last, heavy look with Garp before leaping back to Rouge's side. Together, they escaped into the open sea, leaving a furious, but strangely conflicted, Vice Admiral behind. As they sailed away, Rouge glanced at Luffy. That man, he looked at you like family, Luffy finished quietly. Because he is. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was heavy with unspoken truths. But Rouge didn't press him. She simply reached over, took his hand, and squeezed it. And in that small gesture they both knew, the fight for their freedom was just beginning. The morning sun broke over Dawn Island, spilling molten gold across the treetops and glimmering over the calm waves that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. A gentle breeze carried the scent of salt and pine, and for a moment, Luffy could almost pretend that the world was at peace. But the truth gnawed at him. The world government wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when they knew Rouge existed. Not when they knew he was here. Rouge stood beside him on the cliffside, her loose hair catching the light like strands of fire. She wasn't wearing her usual dress but rather a simple blouse and skirt, her bare feet dusted with dew. She looked so alive in the morning glow, her eyes still holding the spark from the night before when they'd whispered their dreams to each other under the stars. "You're thinking about them again," she said softly, not even needing to ask. Her hand found his, warm and certain. Luffy's jaw tightened. "They'll come. They always do. But this time, I'll make sure they regret it." Rouge's gaze didn't waver. "I don't want you to fight for me. I want you to fight with me. If they're going to try and decide our fate, then they'll have to face us both." Her voice had that unshakable resolve that reminded him so much of Ace, but also of himself. It made his chest ache. This wasn't the quiet, hidden Rouge history had told him about. This was a Rouge who had found her courage before tragedy could break her. A shadow passed overhead, a small seagull, but its presence tugged Luffy's attention skyward. He could feel it. Something distant. Watching. And then the tree-line behind them stirred. From the shade emerged a tall, broad figure, clad in the uniform of the Marines but with no insignia on his coat. His face was carved with deep lines, his eyes sharp but conflicted. "Luffy," the man said, voice heavy with recognition. Rouge's grip on Luffy's hand tightened. She whispered, "Do you know him?" Luffy's brow furrowed. "Yeah. That's Garp." But it wasn't the old man he remembered from his own time. This Garp was younger, stronger looking, but his aura was still just as overwhelming. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the air between them. "Monkey D, Luffy," Garp said, stepping forward, "and Portgas D, Rouge. The world government has ordered me to bring you both in." Rouge's breath caught. Luffy's expression hardened. "Over my dead body," he said. Garp's eyes flickered, with something Luffy couldn't read, before his fists clenched. "Then you'd better be ready." The cliffside erupted into motion as the first blows were exchanged. The sea roared far below. And in that moment, Rouge realized something terrifying and beautiful. Fate was already bending. The night sky over the Sabati archipelago was a tapestry of starlight, glimmering against the shadowy outlines of mangrove roots. The air hung thick with humidity, carrying the faint scent of salt and the distant rhythm of waves. Luffy stood on the edge of the small dock, one arm protectively around Rouge, his eyes scanning the dark water for the ship Rayleigh had promised would be waiting. The moonlight painted her hair silver, but he could see the faint tremor in her stance, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Rouge had been pushing herself harder these past weeks. Her pregnancy was advancing, but unlike in the history Luffy remembered, she refused to fade into isolation. She wanted to move, to fight, to live beside him. She was determined to outpace fate itself. And tonight they would try. "Rayleigh said they'd be here before the tide shifts," Luffy murmured, his voice low, eyes darting to every sound. "We just have to." The sudden screech of metal against wood cut him off. From the shadow of the mangroves, a long, sleek ship slid into view, not the one they were expecting. Its polished hull reflected the moonlight like a blade, and on its deck stood men in immaculate white uniforms. Marines. And not just any Marines. At the bow, a tall figure in a navy coat lined with gold stared them down. His jaw was sharp, his eyes piercing beneath the brim of his cap. Even at this distance, Luffy knew that presence. Sengoku. But this was Sengoku decades younger, without the streaks of gray, his frame even more solid, his stance rigid with purpose. His voice carried across the water, deep and commanding. "Portgas D, Rouge. Monkey D, Luffy. You're both under arrest by order of the world government. Surrender now." Rouge's grip on Luffy's hand tightened. "They know my name." "They've probably known for a while," Luffy said, already pulling her back toward the shelter of the mangroves. But we're not going with them. Before Sengoku could speak again, another sound broke the night, a slow, deliberate clap. From the shadowed deck behind him, another figure emerged, draped in flowing white robes and a veil that caught the wind. Luffy's stomach twisted. He didn't need to see their face to know who it was. Ima. Or at least, a younger, sharper version of them. Their presence felt like ice on his skin, a stillness so unnatural that even the insects in the mangroves seemed to fall silent. Ima's voice was soft but carried across the water with chilling clarity. You think you can outrun the will of the world? They said, tilting their heads slightly. You, who should not exist, and the woman who dares defy the shape of destiny. Rouge's chin lifted defiantly. Destiny doesn't own me. Ima smiled faintly. We'll see. The air shifted. From the deck of the marine ship, 3 cloaked figures stepped forward, each moving with inhuman precision. Luffy's eyes narrowed. CP0. This wasn't just an arrest. This was an extermination. Luffy yanked his straw hat lower over his eyes. Rouge, stay close to me. We're getting out of here. She didn't argue. They bolted into the deeper shadows of the mangroves just as the first volley of gunfire erupted, bullets tearing into wood and water. Luffy's haki flared, deflecting the rounds, but the echo of Ima's gaze stayed fixed on his back. Somewhere ahead, a flicker of orange light caught his attention, the signal Rayleigh had given them. They ran toward it, but their path was suddenly blocked by a shadow dropping from the trees. The figure landed lightly, a long polearm in hand, and a grin that didn't belong in a night like this. You're not making this easy for me, are you? Luffy froze. That voice. It was Shanks. Not the Yonko he knew, this was a younger Shanks, maybe in his late teens, with both arms and eyes burning with mischief and steel. But his stance wasn't friendly. I've been told to bring you in, Shanks said, twirling his weapon. Sorry, but orders are orders. Rouge looked between them. You know him? Luffy's chest tightened. Yeah. And this is gonna be a problem. The days following their escape from the clutches of the Marine Patrol passed in a haze of stolen moments and cautious glances. Rouge and Luffy traveled along the quieter islands of the East Blue, avoiding busy ports and the looming sails of marine ships. The scent of the sea was always there, salt and freedom, but so was the heaviness in the air. It wasn't just the danger of being hunted that weighed on them, it was the awareness that their time together was fragile, borrowed against the inevitable pull of fate. Yet, Luffy didn't allow the shadow to cloud his heart. He'd fought for her once, and he'd do it 1,000 times more if it meant keeping her smile in the sunlight. Rouge had grown used to Luffy's strange mix of boyish wonder and unshakable conviction. He'd point at the simplest things, bright fish darting beneath the shallows, a cloud shaped like a ship's sail, the glint of sunrise on calm waters, and his grin would be so genuine that her heart would ache. He never seemed to dwell on the fear she sometimes saw in herself, the knowledge that the world government would never let her live in peace. Instead, he made her laugh, pulling her into small adventures even on the quietest islands. And though she didn't say it out loud, each laugh felt like a rebellion against the world that wanted her caged. But trouble had a way of finding them. It began with whispers in the taverns they passed, rumors of a bounty not just on Rouge, but now on the mysterious man traveling with her. The posters didn't show Luffy's real face, the sketch was vague, like a shadow at the edge of memory. But the numbers were rising, and that meant the hunt was intensifying. One evening, as they anchored off a small, unnamed island, Luffy sat on the edge of the boat with his legs dangling over the water. Rouge joined him, her hair loose and glowing gold in the fading light. You're thinking about the posters, she said softly. I'm thinking about how annoying it is they can't even draw me right, Luffy replied with a lopsided grin. But yeah, it means they're getting closer. He glanced at her, his eyes steady. We'll deal with it. I'm not letting anyone take you. Rouge hesitated. Luffy, this isn't just about me anymore. If they catch you, if they find out who you are, you'll become a target far worse than me. Rue, Luffy said firmly. I've been a target my whole life. Doesn't change what I'm gonna do now. His voice carried that unshakable conviction she'd come to know so well, but it was the warmth in his eyes that undid her. For the first time in weeks, she leaned her head against his shoulder without the weight of hesitation. The next morning, their peace was shattered. A Marine scout ship had found their anchor point, and before dawn's first light, the clash of boots on sand reached their ears. Luffy reacted instantly, pushing Rouge behind him as he leapt onto the beach. The Marines weren't many, perhaps a dozen, but their intent was clear. And leading them was a man whose coat bore the insignia of the Marine headquarters. Port Gas Rouge, the officer called out. By order of the world government, you are under arrest for aiding and abetting enemies of the state. Luffy cracked his knuckles. Guess they're not here for tea. The fight was quick, brutal, and decisive. Luffy moved like a storm, fists striking with precision, sending Marines sprawling into the sand. But the officer was skilled, faster than the usual patrol captain. His blade narrowly missed Luffy's neck more than once, and the duel drove them toward the edge of the rocky shore. Rouge, though no fighter, found herself gripping a fallen Marine's rifle for defense, her heart pounding as the chaos raged around her. She hated it, hated the sight of him bleeding from a shallow cut on his cheek, hated the way the Marines looked at her like prey. And in that moment, something in her hardened. She wouldn't be a burden. She wouldn't just watch. When the officer lunged for Luffy's exposed back, Rouge moved. The rifle but struck the man's jaw with enough force to stagger him, and Luffy didn't waste the opening. One powerful blow sent the officer flying into the surf, unconscious. They didn't wait to see if reinforcements were coming. Within minutes, they were back on the boat, sails catching the wind as the island shrank behind them. As they moved into open water, Luffy glanced at her, half smiling despite the blood drying on his cheek. You've hit him pretty hard. Rouge exhaled shakily, still gripping the rifle. I'm tired of being chased. I'm tired of waiting for someone else to save me. You're not waiting anymore, Luffy said. We're in this together. The horizon stretched wide ahead of them, but Rouge knew the seas were closing in. The world government's reach was long, and their patience was short. And somewhere deep inside, she felt the stirrings of something dangerous. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could fight fate and win. The wind over Hakanosu carried the scent of rust, salt, and blood. An island built on betrayal rarely smelled of anything else. The Straw Hat's thousand sunnies slid into the jagged cove, sunlight fractured by the towering spires of volcanic rock. Luffy stood at the bow, straw hat tilted low, eyes half-lidded but sharp, observation Haki sweeping the island like a predator's gaze. Feels weird, he muttered. What's weird? Zoro asked, hand already resting on Enda's hilt. The air's too quiet, Luffy said. Like, it's holding its breath. Robin's dark eyes narrowed. That's never a good sign. It was supposed to be an alliance meeting. Blackbeard had sent the message himself. After the fall of Marineford, the world was fracturing. An agreement between the two emperors would have cemented the Straw Hat's dominance and sent shockwaves across every sea. But as they disembarked, Luffy's ears caught something no one else could hear, the subtle flicker of killing intent. Not a roar, but the crack of a flint before the spark. Blackbeard emerged from the shadow of a collapsed fort, his grin wide and crooked, the sun flashing across gold teeth. Zay-ha-ha-ha! Straw Hat! You really came! Luffy smiled back, But it wasn't joy. Yeah. I came. The words had weight. Heavy. Final. Let's talk business. Blackbeard began, but his aura shifted mid-sentence. Luffy's observation Haki, sharpened over years and tempered in the fires of battle, caught it. The moment the man's will turned to bloodlust. Now. Without warning, darkness exploded from the ground, tendrils of the Yami Yami no Mi surging upward like a tidal wave of void. In the same heartbeat, sniper fire cracked, cannon shots thundered, and the earth itself trembled. Ambush! Sanji roared, kicking into the air to intercept a cannonball mid-flight. The Straw Hats scattered, each drawn into their own war. Zoro's blades met Shiryu's invisible steel. Frankie's weapons clashed with a monstrous, reinforced Burgess. Nami's lightning lit the chaos as Robin's petals bloomed into strangling walls. Luffy didn't move. He let the darkness rush toward him, let it swallow the ground at his feet, then stepped forward, forcing it to recoil like it had touched fire. Zihahaha, you've gotten stronger. Blackbeard sneered, Gura cracks forming in the air around his fists. But strength ain't enough when you're facing me. Luffy tilted his head, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over his eyes. We'll see. The first clash was not physical, it was will against will. Blackbeard's conqueror's Haki burst outward, dark and jagged like shattered glass, tearing chunks of the ground into the air. Luffy's answered instantly, flooding the battlefield with golden arcs of lightning, the sky above warping under the pressure. The collision sent shockwaves for miles. Ships in the harbor split in half. Birds fell from the sky. Even the other battles faltered as both crews turned to witness the duel. Blackbeard lunged, fist coated in armament so dense it bent the light around it. Luffy sidestepped, moving with such precision it was as if he'd known exactly where the blow would land, because he had. His observation wasn't just seeing seconds ahead anymore. It was seeing branches, threads of possible futures weaving and breaking around him. If I move here, he'll swing there. If I dodge right, the quake hits Sanji. So. Luffy's fist shot forward, not where Blackbeard was, but where he would have to be to defend himself. The punch landed flush on the man's ribs, armament so refined it bypassed his defenses entirely. Blackbeard grunted, darkness flaring to absorb the force, but the damage was real. Zihahaha! Good one, but I'm just getting started! The ground around them buckled as Blackbeard unleashed his awakened Yami, the void twisting gravity itself. Luffy felt the pull, the crushing weight threatening to drag him under. Memories flickered. The mountains Garp had thrown him down, the days without food or water, the sea storms he'd been forced to ride without a ship. He smiled. Golden lightning burst from his body, coating him entirely. This wasn't Gear 4th. This wasn't Gear 5th. This was something older, raw will hardened to perfection. The air shimmered, heatless but sharp, the pressure enough to drive weaker men to their knees. Full Haki mastery. Every punch was laced with invisible conqueror's coating, every step shielded by near-impenetrable armament. His observation danced ahead of him like a living map of fate itself. They moved faster than eyes could follow. Each clash tore the island further apart. Then Luffy stopped holding back. Goma Goma no! His voice rumbled, not with effort but with absolute certainty. Psycho no Pisatoru! The punch landed, golden lightning meeting crushing darkness, and the world split. The sun was merciless that day on Dawn Island, its glare bouncing off the sharp rocks of the coast where a boy was being beaten into the earth. Not by an enemy, not by a pirate, but by the man who claimed to be his grandfather. Monkey D. Garp, hero of the Marines, the man who once chased the pirate king himself, stood over Luffy with his arms folded, a grin splitting his scarred face. You call that a punch, brat? That's the kind of hit that wouldn't scare a sea king's tail. Luffy groaned, his knuckles raw and bleeding, but he stood again. His bare feet dug into the jagged stones, and without hesitation, he lunged forward with another punch. Garp didn't dodge. He let Luffy's fist crash into his chest, felt the Haki inside it tremble and falter, and then swatted the boy across the ground like an insect. Again! It was the same command he had barked 1,000 times over the past year. The training had begun after Garp had caught wind of Luffy's dream, not just to be a pirate, but to become the Pirate King. Garp could have locked him away, chained him, or beaten him until the dream broke. But deep inside, he knew his grandson's spirit would never die. And if Luffy was going to sail into the maw of the Grand Line, he would damn well do it armed with more than rubber and guts. This wasn't the gentle Garp that the world saw in his later years. This was prime Garp, still a monster in strength, still feared by pirates and marines alike. His strikes cracked stone. His voice could freeze a battlefield. And his training was the kind that could turn steel into dust. He didn't just make Luffy run laps through the forests. He made him sprint across a battlefield littered with cannon fire, dodging live shells he'd arranged with friendly marines. He didn't just teach him to punch harder. He tied boulders to his arms and made him spar against wild beasts while fasting for days. And when it came to Haki, Garp was relentless. You think armament Haki is just coating your fist? Wrong! Garp's roar echoed across the waves. It's control! It's flow! You're gonna learn to break a ship's keel without touching it, to shatter steel with a flick, to harden your body so even magma won't pierce it. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. Observation Haki was next. Garp made Luffy fight blindfolded against a dozen men, then against dozens of arrows fired from hidden positions. He tied bells to Luffy's ankles so every step had to be deliberate, and every movement silent. Soon, Luffy could sense Garp's killing intent before a punch even came. He could feel the presence of every living thing in a forest without opening his eyes. Conqueror's Haki was the hardest. It wasn't something you trained like muscle, it was willpower incarnate. But Garp forced him to refine it. You're a king whether you like it or not, boy. But a wild king dies young. You're gonna learn to use that will to crush armies, not just scare 'em. By the time Luffy was 17, he wasn't just strong, he was a storm barely contained in human form. The years after that were his legend in the making: the East Blue, the Grand Line, Enies Lobby, Marineford. But through it all, the foundation was Garp's training, his voice in Luffy's head every time he pushed past his limits. And now, standing on a shattered island in the New World, Luffy would call upon every drop of that strength. Blackbird stood before him, the air heavy with the stench of destruction. His twin devil fruits, dark and tremor, warped reality itself. The sea quaked. The sky bled shadows. Zay-ha-ha-ha! You think you can stop me, Straw Hat? I'm the man who inherited Whitebeard's throne. I'm the one who will rule this sea. Luffy tightened his straw hat and stepped forward, Haki flooding his veins. But this wasn't just armament, observation, and conquerors, it was something beyond. Something Garp had hinted at but never named. Sovereign's will. The absolute harmony of all Haki, fused into one overwhelming force. His body glowed with an invisible pressure, his eyes sharp enough to cut through darkness itself. The battle began, and the island screamed. The sky split in two. Not with lightning, but with will. On the blood-red seas of the New World, two monstrous conquerors stood across from each other on the deck of a shattered island ship, the remnants of an entire archipelago they had destroyed with their Haki alone. Monkey D. Luffy stood bare-chested, straw hat tilted low, every muscle coiled like tempered steel. His skin shimmered with coated armament so dense it reflected the dying sun, while invisible barrier Haki rippled around him, distorting the air. Sparks of future sight observation flickered in his eyes, not just seeing seconds ahead, but entire battle flows. Opposite him, Blackbeard laughed, darkness swirling around his frame, 2 devil fruits at full power. Ziha ha ha! You've come far, Straw Hat! But all the Haki in the world won't save you now! Luffy grinned, not the boyish smile of the old days, but a sharper, kingly smirk. This isn't all the Haki in the world, Teach! He raised a fist. The air groaned. From his arm burst a fusion of Conqueror's coding, internal destruction armament, and a devastating shockwave technique Garp had once told him only the greatest Marines could dream of using. The ground beneath Blackbeard caved in before Luffy even struck. This is the Haki beyond the world! The punch landed. The sea itself split to the horizon. Chapter 1: The Boy Who Was Forged in Steel and Haki. 7-year-old Monkey D. Luffy was screaming. Not from fear, from sheer rage. He dangled from a cliff, 100 meters up, the rope tied around his waist fraying strand by strand. Below, jagged rocks and a roaring sea waited like hungry sharks. Above, leaning casually on a boulder with a grin sharp enough to cut steel, stood Prime Garp, the hero of the Marines, at the absolute height of his power. Come on, brat! Garp's voice boomed like a cannon. If you can't climb this cliff with your bare hands, you'll never master Haki. I don't even know what Haki is, Luffy shouted, kicking his legs and trying to grip the sheer rock face. Then you'll learn before you hit the bottom, Garp barked, laughing like a maniac. This was how it started, before Ace, before Sabo, before any dreams of being Pirate King. Garp had decided that his grandson would not just be strong, he would be the strongest man alive. And to Garp, that meant mastering all 3 forms of Haki before Luffy was even a teenager. The training was insane. Observation Haki, blindfolded runs through a forest where Garp and wild animals attacked from every direction. Armament Haki, punching iron blocks until his fists bled, then coating them in invisible armor to shatter boulders. Conqueror's Haki, Garp would unleash his own monstrous will to knock Luffy down, forcing him to stand until he could remain conscious under the pressure. And that was only the morning routine. But there was more, something Garp had never taught anyone else. A Prime Garp secret, Haki fusion techniques. Ways to combine observation and armament for predictive counterstrikes, or to merge conquerors with raw strikes for kingly destruction. And day by day, the boy who had once cried at the thought of pain began to laugh in the face of it.